Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Black British Parent Podcast. And today we have an amazing, phenomenal guest, Mr. Lee Jasper. He told me not to call him Mr., but I can't help it. I'm going to try not to. Thank you, Lee, for joining us today.
No
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good,
A little
good,
bit nervous,
good.
but fine.
Don't be nervous. Just a chat with an old guy.
Innit? Please, for those of us who may not know your extensive history and who you are and where you're coming from, please tell our audience about yourself, a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Lee Jasper. I've been an activist for 40, 50 years, I think. Born in Manchester. Lived with my grandparents, English grandmother and African grandfather. My father's Jamaican, from Cuban ancestry. Got into trouble, went to prison very early for fighting with police officers, came out, took an access course that were all the rage in 81 when people had civil disturbances. They provided an access course that if you went and passed this course, you could automatically qualify for university and they'd give you a grant.
Gosh, yeah.
And I'd left school without any qualifications, so I went to this access course and got into my university and qualified with a degree. And then moved to London and became an activist in London. I was chair of Mangrove Community Association in All Saints Road for 15 years.
Wow.
Chief steward of Carnival. Worked with Frank Critchlow, who's a legendary figure from Trinidad and a Black Power activist. And created the National Black Caucus, which is a sort of equivalent of a Black Lives Matter movement today, I guess. Unconstituted network of activists who just got on with doing stuff. Our largest residential 3-day conferences were 1,800 people for 3 days in Leicester and Liverpool. And that was at a time where we could, really empower Black communities to begin to think about self-mobilization. Involved in all of the major campaigns, Stephen Lawrence, Broadwater Farm, Cardiff 3, Roland Adams, and advocated behalf of those, challenged policing, later became director and founder of the 1990 Trust, formed UK's first black website in 1996 called Black Information Link, Blink for short. By the time they closed it down, and it was closed down by the authorities, we were on 750,000 hits a month, and that was in 1999.
Wow. Why did they close that down?
Well, when they attacked me, when I became a mayoral advisor, and I had a prolonged, sustained attack, the focus was on me, and then they looked at every single organisation I was associated with. And then they went after them, trying to imply that there was some dodgy dealings or I was funding my friends or whatever it is they were saying. And so all of those organisations suffered greatly under that weight of inquiry and folded. So created the Blink website. And I remember I was director of the 1990 Trust. And it was November, it was my birthday. I think it was 1997. And it was the very first time that the National Lotteries had published, and they had big fanfare. And they said, we're going to use this money to fund things. So I thought to myself, I'm going to apply for that. It's my birthday. Rather than buy a ticket, I'm going to make an application. So I made an application. And lo and behold, they gave me £250,000 for 4 years, which helped me embed the site, create the site, and make it Britain's most popular black website at the time. Which was nice.
Yeah.
Except a couple of weeks after I got that award, I held a huge demonstration against police brutality in Brixton. And I blocked off the roads here on the High Street. And then I went up to Windrush Square and, the sort of intersection, Cole Harbour Lane, blocked that all off for 4 hours. And the police attacked the demonstration. So it ended up in a huge fight. And then the following Sunday, huge headline in the Daily Mail. So, Riot man gets lottery cash. So I was,
no way.
I still have it pinned on the wall somewhere. So they didn't take the money off us. They still buy their guns. Yeah. But so I did that. And then I became mayoral. I had a long relationship with the Mayor of London. So I became Deputy Mayor of London, responsible for qualities across London, supply side diversity, procurement, as well as policing, community safety and criminal justice. Stayed there for 8 years, was subject to most virulent attack in the latter stage, not just me. Ken Livingstone, his Asian advisor, was attacked for being a Muslim. I was attacked for being a black separatist and the spawn of Farrakhan, etc. So, yeah, they went for me as they did. And I spent the next 10 years really recovering because it's a brutal fight.
Yeah.
So I tended to my family and my kids and my wife. And the last 5 years really came back out. Somebody's doing some strategic consultancy for national black organisations who are thinking how to position themselves and what the future trend analysis tells us about the economy, social and political trends. So I do a future forecast analysis for you, and I suggest to you that, given your objectives, where you should be placing yourself in your sort of market or sector. So I've been doing that for a number of years. It's been tremendously successful. Done work in East Africa around ethical governance. Totally different atmosphere when you're talking about people who could easily get killed just for asking for basic governance and transparency and accountability. It brings a whole new frame of reference to your work. Gambia, Kenya, Uganda. Yeah, I've done the lots.
Yes.
I could be here a long time.
That is phenomenal, and that's a definitely extensive CV, as it were, maybe.
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't know how you've been able to keep on going and still keep on going now. There's a lot of resistance.
Yeah.
A lot of challenges through those years.
Yeah, I think. Well, I've had to take a break.
Yeah, of course.
You can't be in the ring all the time.
Yeah.
Because you got to think about self-care and the care of those around you. Because if you're a black activist who's married and has family, your family carries that weight. Either the lack of income. Everybody will laud you for saying the right thing on the TV and radio, but nobody comes to your house and says, "Has your baby got booties?" or whether how you and your family getting on. That's very rare. And so they carry that economic burden. Then there is the mental burden, which is you're constantly in the public eye, and your family, your wife, your children have to bear that, and it's not without cost. And so it can be quite tough. And so you do need to take a break, and self-care is extraordinarily important. And I'm glad I took my break.
I'm glad you did too, and we're glad you're back. And thank you so much for all the work you put in over the years. I mean, we all benefit from this in so many ways, and you're one of my inspirations, and I get to speak to you today. So we normally have an icebreaker, although we've broken ice already.
Okay.
But for the sake of consistency, and please tell us if you have one of your favorite films of all time.
I'd have to say One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, really.
Oh, yes.
I have to say that movie because, it's a metaphor, isn't it, for the extreme outsider and the alienation and the oppressive nature of state and the biomedical interference, forcing you to have injections and chemical therapy. And in the midst of all of that depression and oppression, there's this one spark of joyous rebelliousness, and I just love the movie. I love the book better than the movie, to be fair. But
no, I did watch the movie. It was a really good movie, and I read the book eventually. Thank you for sharing that.
No worries.
That's awesome, guys. Check it out if you haven't watched it already. So, you have been an important figure fighting for racial justice and equality in the UK. So, could you share with us what inspired you to become such a prominent voice on these issues?
I think it was my mum, I think she just couldn't buy it. She was always the underdog, always backing the underdog. I remember we sit as a young boy, you watch Saturday wrestling on TV, and whoever was the sort of bad guy, that's the guy my mum didn't like, Get him. And she used to have these sort of folk hate heroes, and she used to really drum into me that, if your responsibility is to defend, those who can't defend themselves. So always be on the side, son, of those that are suffering injustice, and stand up for them. And I just had an abiding passion for justice. It got me into a lot of trouble even in school because I would challenge stuff. Because most of the young people in my age group would have come from the Caribbean, so they weren't used to these white teachers. I was born here. I was used to them, so I could more confidently challenge on behalf of what I've seen.
Yeah.
We were in a school, my secondary school, where all of the black boys were in the bottom stream with all of the Bangladeshi boys and girls who couldn't speak English. But we were deemed educationally subnormal and put in that bottom class along with people who didn't speak English. And here I was, born in England, speaking English, and yet deemed educationally subnormal so I always used to speak out on behalf of my community and friends. And I guess that's my mum's rebellious spirit. If you called me a name as a child, my mum would come out, pick up a brick and put it in your head.
Gosh.
That's how fierce my mum was about protecting her children, but also in relation to, we don't let anybody take any liberties with us. We'd rather fight. And she did. And so it got to the point where I'd have to, you got one of the mums where you have to limit what you tell them because you have to calibrate whether you want that nuclear explosion or whether you'd rather let it pass for a peaceful life. Yeah, I was always metering what I told Mum was happening in wider society, because I know that she's a little pocket firehouse, a rocket, and she will tear up things.
Mash it up. What was that like during that era, being in school and having, your counterparts coming over from the Caribbean? What was that experience like?
It's great for me because, from being isolated, I'm suddenly not the only sort of non-white person in the classroom. That as the 60s got into the 60s, 65, 66, 67, that trickle from Windrush became a flood. And I just found it enormously satisfying and gratifying. I think there were two things. One, I was learning about Jamaican culture, Barbadian culture, all Caribbean cultures. And I only knew about African culture because of my grandfather and Sierra Leone and the struggle for liberation in West Africa for that. And then there was this whole new canvas of life. And my father was Jamaican, so I knew a little bit. But it just enriched me in terms of the variety of cultures, histories, stories, language, even intonation and patterns of speech. The way Jamaicans spoke, not quite the same as the way Trinidadians speak, and Trinidadians don't speak in the way in terms of Guyanese speak. And it was just a fascinating linguistic and historical journey for me to uncover. And because I was the guy that was born here, I knew my way around. I was extremely popular because, let's just have Lee, let's take Lee with us because he knows the run-ins.
That's amazing.
So we did that, but it was, it was tough. If we stepped out of our immediate area where we lived, you had to jog. Because if you were caught out in the wrong area by white skinheads or something like that, then you could take a severe beating. So our tactic was to always, when you move out the immediate area, always jog to where you're going. So that if you are chased, you're already running. You're already running. And we take those kind of tactics. And policing was absolutely, policing was the type of policing where a police officer would come up to you, put in the middle of the street, in the middle of the day, right, punch you, put you up against the wall. Just have the uniform badges. They used to show you their badge on the other side. Their badge would be an F-Head National Front badge or the Jam Jar Gollywog badges. I don't know if you
I remember them on Marmalade.
Marmalade.
Yeah.
Oh, they used to do the Gollywog badges underneath there. And that is just to let you know
where they stand. Yeah.
I've got you.
Yeah.
And, it's the time of sus law. Remember, sus law is the law where you're arrested on suspicion of committing a crime to people or property unknown. And the only evidence you need is that PC to say he looked like he was about to commit a crime to people or property unknown. And our people went to jail for that. I wasn't going to jail for it. So I thought, if you're going to arrest me for sus, I might as well link you down, because, well, if I'm going to go to jail, let me go to jail for something. Yeah, and that's most people's attitude, and that's why lots of us ended up in prison very early on. So back then, it was a more vicious type of racism and a much more hostile environment.
Gosh, I can't imagine, guys. Think back in the day, like I wish I grew up around you guys' time, because it felt like, you know, the community was a lot more tight, although despite the racism. Nowadays, it doesn't necessarily feel as tight. It is tight in some areas, but it just doesn't feel like how it was,
Not
how I
tight like
imagine
that.
it was back in the day.
Not tight like that. Not tight like that. If you touch one of us, 30 or 40 of us would turn up real quick. And even if we're outnumbered.
And that's without mobile phones and social
And that's
media.
absolutely. Because, if you live in a small community, things get round real quick. And we hung together, we fought together, we got beaten together, we went to jail together, we cried together, we laughed together. But we definitely hung tight.
I like that. It seems that there's this kind of idea sometimes that racism isn't as bad in the UK as it is in the USA. What's your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, I think I think it can be as bad in different ways. I think certainly in terms of the racism of the criminal justice and immigration system, it's as bad. Thank God police officers here don't have guns, because I think we would see a lot more fatalities as a result. We're not anywhere near America in terms of the number of deaths in custody. But we are there in terms of disproportionate sentencing of black people and being subject to systemic institutionalized racism in sentencing and criminal justice and racial profiling by the police. That has extended massively. So if you say in 1999, when we published the Stephen Lawrence report, the Metropolitan Police were stopping 250,000 black people, of which maybe 70 or 80,000 were black. Now they're stopping 2 million people, of which 1.5 million will be black. Yeah. So you see the scale. The percentages look the same. So when you ask them, say, 25% of all black people are black, but 25% of 2 million is a big difference from 25% of. So what we've seen in that period is a ramping up of systemic racism, a ramping up of unemployment, a ramping up of poverty in our community, sustained long-term poverty. And as a consequence, whilst the more cruder aspects of racism, like calling you a nigger or being arrested by a racist police officer who shows you, his racist credentials, whilst they become much more sophisticated in hiding that crude racism, or we fought so hard against the racists that they were actually terrified of black people, so they weren't as brave as they were as racists. What we see now is a return of that kind of caucasity and audacity from people, from a type of racist that we thought was long gone. And now, Nigel Farage is the new Enoch Powell, isn't he? The Reform Party is the new, and now they've got elected MPs, for Christ's sake, in Parliament. Systemic racism in policing is completely out of control. Not only even just affecting us, but affecting women and even, lesbian and gay people and Asians and travellers and so on. So systemic corruption has become institutionalized in there. So it was different in different ways. But at least those times you could get a council house, you could get a job. Even if you were sacked because of some racist, you could still walk out and find another job in, 2 or 3 days very easily. Whereas today, that racism in the labour market is so entrenched, so systemic, that if you're from, Angel Town Estate here, or you're from Stockwell Estate here, or any of the estates in South London, the postcode racism is going to hit you hard, and the extent to which you are going to be able to access opportunities in life is going to be severely curtailed because of the systemic racism. So it's less crude, less obviously violent on the streets,
and more
in some
insidious.
senses, it's more insidious and more violent because of its sustained corrosive destruction of black communities through sheep dipping them over the last 50 to 60 years in constant economic disparity, poverty, disadvantage, and challenge.
I was going to ask you what areas today is where it's more evident, because sometimes I speak to elders and their attitude is, well, you guys got it lucky today. You have more opportunities than we did back in the day. So
no, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that what we've seen is that racism has become more systemic, more institutionalized, more corrupt, and more finessed, right? Racism is like an Apple iPhone. You know, they bring a new version out every year and they slightly change it. Last year it was people on small boats. Next year it'll be Muslim fanatics. You know, the week after that it'll be, LGBTQ trans people. The week after that it'll be, black people, you know, black women are not looking after their kids. And that's why they're all violent. And they'll pick and choose, their routine targets that have been thoroughly rehearsed and rinsed out over the years. And periodically they just change the target to make you think, well, it's not all about black people. Look, we're criticizing Muslims. And then look, we're criticizing white gay people. Oh, look, we're criticizing, feckless disabled people who should be at work who are claiming sickness benefit or some other. So they have a ready-made catalogue of scapegoats, and their strategy is gaslighting in order to distract communities from the real destructors of our economy, the bankers and the elite who continually, deceive us to exploit us.
Yeah, the focus on each other instead of them.
Exactly. Yeah. Divide and rule.
100%. So the relationship between black communities and the police has always been quite tense. What are the key changes that need to happen in policing to address this systemic problem the issues that you mentioned and the disproportionate effects on black British people?
Yeah, you got to really abolish the police as a system as it currently is. It can't be reformed. Can't be beyond reform. You take the Metropolitan Police. What is it? A £3.7 billion a year organisation. That's bigger than some GDP economies. It's bigger than St. Lucia's economy. I can tell you that. It's bigger than Guyana or even Jamaica's economy. You're talking about virtual empires with publicity departments, lawyers, diplomats, aggressive soldiers on the ground, military, quasi-military capability, surveillance capability. Now we've got an undercover police inquiry going on now. Who were they spying on? Victims of racism, Stephen Lawrence family, the Roland Adams family, It's actually going on right now, revealing the dark underbelly of the policing. It cannot be saved as it is. It has to be scrapped and reconstituted. And it can be done. So, for instance, an example in British history is the abolishment of the Royal Ulster Constabulary. They were considered to be the dregs of Ulster and, violently attacked the Catholic community and undermined them. And when it came to the Good Friday Agreement, they didn't say, well, we're going to reform that and bring in some new policies and stick a new guy. They said, no, their reputation is so bad, so toxic that we'll have to scrap it and start again. And they created the police service of Northern Ireland. Now, things aren't perfect in Northern Ireland, but they're no way near that they used to be. And from going from 1% Catholic representation in the IUC to now 50. People don't know this, but Northern Ireland is the only place where we have affirmative action. For every Protestant police officer you employ, you have to have a Catholic employed.
Gosh.
So when they say we can't do affirmative action in the UK, well, actually, you're already doing it in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
And so my view is, look, we're wasting our time appealing to the angels of their better nature. My dad would say to me, boy, stop trying to carry water in a basket. And that's what it is when you're trying to reform the Met. And I've tried to reform the Met. So I've been a reformist. I'm not talking from an ideological perspective. I've climbed that mountain. And I saw, with even the massive weight of Ken Livingstone behind me and all the political authority I had, I could only move that dial so much. Yeah. And why? Is because the racism is systemically embedded into the organization. So you can't reform the police. You're going to have to start again and recreate a new institution that has greater community accountability and transparency.
I hear that. I like the sound of that, but I just can't imagine that happening. I want to imagine that happening, but like you said, the example that you gave in Northern Ireland, how do they get that emotion and make that happen? Do you see what I mean? I can't imagine or fathom that happening.
Oh, I think I think it's the Met's in the biggest crisis it's ever been in its entire life.
Yeah,
this commissioner's struggling. This is not a man waving. This is a man drowning. Right? He likes to give the appearance that we've got it under control. And you saw the recommendations from the Casey review, which it was just a litany of corruption.
So remind us of the Casey review.
The Casey review is Baroness Casey, who published a review 2 years ago that was into the death of Sarah Everard. And she found gross systemic misogyny. She found police officers who were, beating their wives and stealing their job. She found that racism was rampant in the police service, and that the series of killings of young gay men in East London didn't get investigated because of rampant homophobia within the service. So what she's pointed at is that this is not just police service that discriminates against black people. This is a systemically corrupt service. And she set out in a very detailed report, which was devastating, that the Met had 2 years to change. And if it didn't change, then it would have to face the question of being abolished. And those 2 years are up in March 2025 next year. And we will be pushing. One of my other hats is I'm chair of a Alliance of Police Accountability, which is a national network of national black organisations who are pushing for the kind of abolition that we've spoken about here. And we'll be having our Baroness Casey spoke at our launch conference last year, and she's going to be speaking at the 2-year anniversary. She set out 5 tests for the police to meet in 2 years, and if they didn't meet them, she would be calling them out on their failure and calling for abolition. And they're nowhere near meeting those tests, and 2 years is up next year. So it may seem like a distant pipe dream. I'm sure it did to the Catholics of Northern Ireland at a time, but where there's life, there's hope, and we ain't finished yet. So we have to finish the job of ending systemic racism in policing and criminal justice. Otherwise, the next generation is going to continue to struggle with the same issues that we did on a larger scale. And I don't think anybody of my age group could bear to go to their grave knowing that that legacy is something we've allowed to be passed on to the next generation. So we're determined to work intergenerationally, work across our communities to try and bring that eventuality about.
Gosh, I definitely want to be kept posted about that in the future and how that turns out and pans out. I mean, I probably will know anyway, but I'm definitely going to be looking out for that one. Stop and search policies continue to be controversial. Can you discuss the impact on the black community and what alternatives could be effective in addressing crime without criminalizing our youth?
Well, stop and search is a consequence of racial profiling in the Met. So police officers have a preconceived idea: black guys bound to have some cannabis on him, bound to have a knife on him, bound to be in a gang, bound to be criminal, bound to up to no good, whatever the suspicion. That's their motivation. Yeah. And what it leads to is you go fishing in a salmon pool and then you're surprised when you catch salmon. So we're completely racial profiled on the street. You hit our young people because you suspect they have small amounts of cannabis on them. And the biggest gateway into the criminal justice system is arrests for personal amounts of cannabis. Now, cannabis is legalized halfway around the world, and I've just come back from the States. It's legalized. Going to Washington, you can smell the high grade everywhere, right? And it's being sold openly, right? Because people understand that actually this is fairly innocuous drug and people should have the right to take it and choose it. Here, we're still criminalizing people. That's the main gateway for criminalization for young black people into a system. Now, when you get into the criminal justice system, if you're black, then discrimination escalates at every stage. So it's like you're standing on an escalator and it's going to take you to the top. And when you get to the top, you're going to receive an unfair discriminatory sentence. So for instance, for cannabis possession, you're 20 times more likely to go to court if you're black than if you're white, even if you're both first-time offenders. So I've got nothing in my record, you've got nothing in your record, we've both got 10 pounds of cannabis, you're getting a caution because you're white, I'm getting sent to court because I'm black. So I'm entered into the criminal justice system early. If it's cocaine, it's something like 50 times more. So if we get back with 20 pounds of cocaine, you're still likely to get a caution. I'm still likely to be escalated up to court. And when you get to court, you're more likely to plead not guilty. If you know anything about the criminal justice system, if you plead not guilty and are found guilty, they attach a third extra to your sentencing tariff. But black people, according to the government's own figures, receive an ethnic disproportionate sentencing of 24 months above the comparable white offender. So it's an apartheid criminal justice system that they say is non-discriminatory, and it impacts on black communities. And therefore this stop and search, which is, just being described, we're just trying to help protect your communities. The biggest safeguarding threat to black communities is the police, because you are ensnaring our young people into the criminal justice system through this racial profiling, and you're letting white teenagers off with small amounts of cannabis and a strong word, and while black ones, in Brixton police station waiting to go to court the next day. So it's disproportionate, it's unfair, it's discriminatory, it's racist, and part of the motivation why we have to fight like hell not to turn into America, where millions of African Americans are ensconced on a prison industrial complex, where they're fed in. Don't forget, in this country, it costs you, £35,000 to send a kid to Eton? Yeah. And it costs you 135 to keep him in youth detention. Yeah. But
so how much to keep him in detention?
135. Yeah. So it's 135 grand a year for you to keep a kid in youth detention, which is 75% black, let me add that, the youth detention estate here, right? They prefer to spend the 135,000, right, than send you to Eton or Cambridge, which would cost 75% less.
Yeah, that's wild.
And so what's important for our community to understand is the government had just announced, the previous government, before they got thrown out, announced the growth of 100,000 extra prison places. So they're building throughout the country over a 5-year period. They're going to bring 100,000 more prison places into cell. Now, when I was in the mayor's office, I found out how you calculate prison cells, because obviously you must be able to say, how many do you need? You need 50,000, you need 100,000. Do you know how they calculate prison places? What they do is they look at exclusions.
Yes.
They look at exclusion rates and they project, and it's accurate. The thing is, it's not discriminatory in that sense, it's accurate. So kids are unfairly excluded from school, right, then fall into the trap, right, and are escalated up the criminal justice system. Now, when we go to jail, the policeman gets paid, the probation officer gets paid, the judge gets paid, the architect who built the jail gets paid, the people who provide the services to the jail gets paid. Everybody feeds off your black skin when you're incarcerated, yeah? And what you find is that we've been turned into a product. Yeah, we are the raw material for the criminal justice system. We bring the profit margin to the criminal justice system, and so as many of us that they can cram in, which is why the jail system's completely full, packed to the rim, right? They're building more jail cells because they need to make more money. They want to make more money. And the people that they're going to put in those cells, your child's excluded now, right? You may as well think that they've got their name above a cell now waiting for them. That's how profound school exclusion is, and that's how profound the systemic racism in policing is as it translates to our communities.
Hey family, we hope you're enjoying the show. If you want to stay up to date with all things Black British Parent, we've got the perfect way for you to do just that. Join our mailing list and be the first to know about new episodes, exciting news, and upcoming events. It's super easy to sign up. Just head over to our website and into your email. Don't miss out on the latest from Black British Parent. Join our community today. Now, back to the show. I guess in some ways it kind of aligns with the current message of the recent releasing of people that were in prison recently over the last few weeks. Obviously, people concerned with all these people being let out early, they're going to want to demand that more prison spaces be available, isn't it? The community's going to align with that.
But the demand for prison places, more prison places was taken about 18, the decision was taken about 2 years ago. And they're in the process of building those prisons now. So even more important, we don't want those prison spaces filled up with the usual suspects because, as I just said, 200,000 people stopped and searching 99, 2.5 million today. What's it going to be 10 years' time? Another 4.5 million.
How can parents and families kind of prevent or, I guess, I don't know.
You've got to join organizations. Yeah, you've got to join organizations. I mean, our community, sections of our community spend money they haven't got on to impress people they don't know. And they need to stop doing that and investing in their children's education and the solidity and continuity of family. You've got to recreate Black families. You've got to reestablish the fundamental of Black families. If you don't do that, you've got no moral framework. You've got no coercive ambition. We should have a Black university in the United Kingdom by now. We should have Black schools, right, that focus on educational development for our children through the cultural lens of our history and so on. We should have that. Yeah, you go to America, historical Black colleges are all over the place. They're celebrated. Nobody says, "Oh, that's a racist institution." In fact, Morehouse and is it Stanford or Stepford, the Sterling, the women's universities in Atlanta, Chicago. 30% of their students are not Black. They come from China, they come from Europe, because excellence is the thing that they're looking for. And they know that these universities produce outstanding leaders. And so if our communities here continue to be fragmented and divided amongst ethnic and tribal lines, or, these sorts of false political divides like you're a Tory and I'm a Labour, if we fall for all of that disingenuous propaganda, then we're inviting a future for our children which is catastrophic, and I'll go on to say why. Catastrophic for them. And so we have to stop giving our money to Sky and invest that in a supplementary school. We have to stop banking with Barclays and get it into your local credit union where you can get low-cost loans and where your money can be recirculated to people like you who need loan business startups. Yeah, we have to stop thinking that atomized families in the sort of single parent families and so on can carry the weight of our community. They can't. Black men have to go home, they have to show up, and they have to be permanent presence in their families' lives. And we have to have deferred gratification. I see I go out on a Saturday night here in Brixton and see, man driving car that could fund an entire community. You understand me? I know he hasn't got nowhere to live and his suitcase is a black plastic bag in the boot. But, right, these are expensive cars that are, 5 or 6, 10. If I could get 10 of these cars, I'd probably sell them and open a school right here. You understand me? So it's not like we don't have the money. We're choosing to spend the money on these other things. And I think that if we could develop an economic strategy, right, to consolidate the collective asset base of Black institutions, mainly the church, because the church is a multi-million pound industry. These churches have got massive assets that they sit on. That could be deployed for education. That's how historical black colleges in the United States came about, because the church funded them. Yeah, and then they went independent, and they still have a relationship with the church, and quite rightly so. And so our churches, which are multi-million pound industries, huge mega churches now that you can go to, why aren't they employing an economic strategy to invest in education and housing and health in our communities? And this is what we've got to wake up to. It's a particular challenge for us because we are the most diverse African diaspora in the world. In America, most people are African Americans, some Caribbeans, but mostly African Americans. Here in the United Kingdom, we have people from Togo, Trinidad, Nigeria, Mali, Somalia. They come with experience of colonialism, no experience of colonialism. I get Nigerians coming over to me, say, I don't know what you people are complaining about. It's great in this country. I'm making money, more fool you. And so you have this variety of diasporic experiences that mitigates against having a coherent vision, because some people might recently arrive, have a totally different perspective about the nature of British society than we do. Those of us who've been here long and know very well, how Brer Fox presents himself in all kinds of variations to make you think he's smiling when he's really intending to bite your arm off at the first available opportunity.
Yeah, I haven't heard Brer Fox for a long time still. It hits at home. Mine too, maybe. So the Windrush scandal was a very shocking revelation of how deep the issues are with the Home Office and how it's affected many Black British lives. What do you think this scandal reveals about the UK's relationship with Black British communities?
What it reveals is that Black people are third-class citizens in a supposed first-class democracy. We always tell, Britain, the land of fairness, equality and justice. And here we have people who were denied their citizenship simply on the basis that they're Black, we don't want them here. That's the basis on which they made that decision. And they locked people in permanent poverty. So you have families who have been completely destroyed because mum and dad couldn't get their citizenship sorted out, couldn't go to work, couldn't claim benefit, couldn't access healthcare. I mean, this is, purgatory of the highest order to put somebody in this no citizen class in which you can access nothing and you're not... you're totally reliant on your entire family, and your entire family's struggling. You were the main breadwinner, and now you face this thing. The fundamental insult is that you are a British citizen, legally a British citizen, and the state conspired to deny you of your citizenship because you're Black, right? Now, I can find no more egregious or violent infringement of one's human rights than to be denied one's citizenship and the consequent effects that has on our family. And even when these evils are caught red-handed, burning the passports and the documents from the Windrush, they still don't have the good grace or humility to offer compensation or provide restitution to people, thousands of people whose lives have been lost. And if you ask me what that tells us if this country continues to have economic decline, the next phrase won't be, we want our country back. The next phrase is, keep Britain white. That's what when people say we want our country back,
that's what they're saying.
That's what they really mean. We want less of you guys around. And if your citizenship can be denied by the state as it was under the Windrush, and now the Home Secretary has conferred themselves the power to strip citizens of anybody they deem undesirable, how long do you think it's going to be before people start saying, well, maybe this country would be better off if it had a lot less Muslims and a lot less Black people, and maybe we should be shipping them out and deporting them? That's the only way for politics to go in the United Kingdom, because as you see, mainstream political parties are trying to outcompete each other on race. And now they come up with the most racist things that you would have thought 20 years ago, no, British politics would never go down that road. Now we're deporting people to Rwanda. Yeah, we're denying Shemina Begum her citizenship and saying, well, you went off to Al-Qaeda so when you were 15,
Yeah.
so we're going to take your passport away. That can be applied to you and me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then you got Windrush, and then you got the racism of the immigration system per se on top of all of that. When they say we have to get even tougher on immigration, right, they're not talking about tackling the gangs who do the small boats. Deep in their subconscious, whether they say it or not, they're talking about making Britain white again. And the more economic challenge this country to face, the more that Nigel Farage will pump that balloon, pump that balloon, pump that balloon. And what was it yesterday they announced, oh, we're going to abolish the 2010 Equalities Act.
Yeah,
well, if you abolish the 2010 Equalities Act, you also abolish the Race Relations Act because it's entwined into there. Now, that's the act that prevented them discriminating in employment, in housing, in education for what it's worth. And they're going to abolish it. Trust me, things will only get worse if our communities do not wake up, organize themselves in defense of their own human rights and the things that my generation and the Windrush generation before me fought so hard to secure.
100%. I was just thinking about just the fact that we were actually asked to be here. You know, we were invited to be here. And you know, I think about my grandparents when they came over here during that era, a little bit after the Windrush itself, but around that kind of time and what they were coming here to do. When I sit at their feet and listen to their stories, they always say they were asked to be here. And yet we're having this issue where they're a bit confused in that respect because they're no longer wanting to be here.
Guess who was the Minister of Labour in the early 60s who went to the Caribbean with a campaign to say London Transport needs you, National Health Service needs you. If you come over now, then, you know, we'll facilitate your passage and so on and so forth. Do you know which minister that was? It was Enoch Powell.
That's it, yeah.
Right, the man who gave the Rivers of Blood speech.
Yeah.
He is the minister responsible who goes to the Caribbean on a national tour or around the Caribbean, recruiting people after the war for people to come to the NHS, to people to come
London
Transport and fix up. This was a broken country on the back of the war. Yeah. And our people responded to the call from the mother country to come and support her. And they turned up, not just from the Caribbean, but Africa and Asia and all around the place. They turned up and they put their weight into providing services and recovery to this country. And look at the thanks that, you know, the descendants of those early pioneers received. It's a dream, because everybody had a dream to return to their motherland. But it's a dream that's been shattered on the rocks of British racism and indifference to our communities.
100%. And what more do you think needs to be done to ensure justice and compensation for those affected by this Windrush scandal?
I think the government's got to decide on a huge sum of money, give it to a black organisation, and we will pay the compensation. You guys are incapable of providing that. You don't want to do it. You know, I think it's a 248-page application form for Windrush. Right, so you're going to have to double first from Oxford to try and negotiate it.
Yeah, there's been some challenges with people applying. Yeah,
absolutely. So they're not making it easy, are they?
No.
Now, give the money to us, black institutions, and let us compensate. We'll decide, you know, what level of compensation people need, and we will provide them with that cash and that money. I think that's the only way that will be resolved. If we're waiting on government to do the right thing, I'm afraid you're going to be waiting a long time.
Gosh. Back to serious violence in our community. Youth violence remains, you know, quite a prevalent issue within our communities. What are the root causes to this problem, and how can we address them beyond just policing?
Well, is it youth violence the most dangerous thing in our community? I don't think it is. Really? I think it's black male violence against women.
Gosh, yes.
Cause more deaths. If you take the number of women who die from domestic violence murders in our community, it's extraordinarily high. And it exceeds the number of teenage deaths. Now, we have to ask ourselves our question: why is the media presenting the issue
Youth
of
violence,
youth
yeah.
violence as the number one danger to our communities, when in fact you're much more likely to lose your life or suffer violent attack? And let's be clear about this. The headlines go to those who die. Quite rightly, it's tragic and it's horrible. But do you know the thousands who are living with disability, who are living with the trauma of a violent attack? Do you know 2/3 of all women who die as a result of domestic violence are killed in front of their children? These are government's figures. Do you know the level of sexual abuse that young black women and girls face from black men? These are deeply serious dysfunctional issues that we've not come to terms with as a community. Yes, we can point to the systematic racism of the police and the fact that long-term endemic poverty produces dysfunctionality wherever you go. Our preference may be the violence, but if you go to Liverpool, it's, you know, the self-abuse of heroin. If you go to Newcastle, it's, monkey spice. So poor people ensconced in long-term poverty either try to self-medicate or adopt some strategy to alleviate that pressure. Some turn to crime and violence, most turn to self-medicating drugs and so on and so forth. And so wherever you see poor communities, whether they're black or white, violence, it's either violence inflicted on yourself or violence inflicted on others and the community. And I don't think we've woken up to the fact that we've got an epidemic of culture of violence in our community. We violently speak to each other. We violently make our music. We violently emphasize our videos. Not all of us 100%, but the vast majority of so-called culture that we see out there is one in which even the articulation between us is hard and violent. And I think that that culture of violence, born of long-term systemic poverty, which is why our economic revival is so central to making safer communities, means that actually black communities are suffering a massively disproportionate wave of violence. And it primarily focuses on black women and young girls, and teenage homicides is an important aspect of that, but it's not the only aspect of it. The other aspect of it is the exploitation of our elders. And the next thing you know, they're in a world of problems. I have to go and sort, I sort those problems out every day, every week in our communities. So the violence is not even just contained to young people and women. It's because violence is not like that. If you've got a culture of violence, it's violence in everything. And unfortunately, because of our long-term being impoverished in this country, we've seen the dysfunctional nature of violence grow incredibly, and we have to take responsibility for it. There's no point blaming those who made us poor, no point blaming the school teacher, no point blaming the head teacher, no point blaming, you have to take responsibility.
Obviously, more than it happening to elders, perhaps vulnerable, disabled people. I've been hearing that happening quite a lot with, not to dismiss,
vulnerable people.
Yeah, vulnerable people. So yeah. That's quite scary. I haven't heard so much about it recently, but it's something I've been hearing about. How can community leaders and organizations work together to create safe spaces and opportunities for our young people, or people in our community generally, to thrive and stay away from violent situations?
Yeah, just get out of the way and give the space to young people. I think that, we have too many people of my age group who are just sort of blocking up leadership spaces, refusing to have any sort of sustainable development for the next generation of leadership, and not investing in sustainability of that leadership, who are more addicted to the status and the benefits of that position rather than representing our communities, and who haven't mastered their brief. I mean, I'm tired of so-called black leaders that I see on TV talking about issues, whether it's violence or whether it's education or the economy, and they haven't got a clue what they're talking about, and yet they're up there on our behalf talking to white people. And of course, white people just look at them, patronize them and say, this one's going to be easy to handle, because they don't
That's
know.
why they pick them, though.
That's why they pick them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And my view is that our role now is to provide the legacy training leadership for the next generation so that they can represent themselves. They've got to be given some of the learning, some of the stuff I speak about here today, quite frankly, so that they can make better choices than we did. See, we believed in the dream, didn't we? You know, most people thought, keep your head down, do the work, 2.5 kids, mortgage, family, occasional holidays in Africa and Jamaica, buy a nice car, and get a pension at the end. We're good. We're golden. Don't need any of that racist trouble on our doorsteps. And that dream's just turned into a facade, a lie. And now we see the deep, you know, deprivation and exclusion of our communities. And so you've got to make space when you're an elder for the next generation. If you haven't got a legacy plan, you need one. Moreover, stop talking about things you don't understand in order to please white people so you can get your grant aid, or your money, and start talking about the real issues that are affecting our communities. And partly, you know, I'm in organizations like Black Socks. It's a social movement, and we're all about self-help. So we're all about, I'm not waiting for a grant. We are going to contribute as Black professionals and put our money in the pot and do what it is that needs to be done. And we do that on a small scale, just to show people you don't have to rely on a grant.
It can be done.
You can do it by yourself. You're doing this podcast by yourself. Not that you didn't get a grant for your equipment and your staff. You invested in it because you knew it would needed to be done. That's the attitude that we now need. People to come together to say, you know what, we're going to trust each other, invest in each other, invest in those supplementary schools, invest in them new businesses so we can employ our kids, develop well-being, therapeutic, because that's the other thing. Poverty messes with your head. You know, we're violent because we're dysfunctional, because poverty pushes you in that direction. And we need therapy. I have therapy. I'd have it every week. You know, I do have it every week because a couple of my friends are psychotherapists. I have to go and see them regularly to make sure that I'm keeping my own mental health on an even keel. And I need an outside pair of eyes on what I'm doing in my life, of people I love and trust, that I can take advice from. And everybody thinks they know everything. Everybody's so certain about how, no, you don't do it like this, we do it like that.
Yeah.
I'm not certain at all. The only thing I know is that when we get together, we are honest, loving, and truthful with each other. There's no power on earth that can stop us. That's what I know. 100%. Everything else is bullshit.
100%. I love that. I think it's definitely something that we don't necessarily consider in terms of well-being. It seems expensive, too expensive, or too costly, or it's not valuable enough. It doesn't make us look like we're the part that we want to play. But I think definitely agree with you. It's something we definitely have to invest more in.
Absolutely.
Well-being. So you kind of we kind of mentioned about mobilizing the community and on various issues. What strategies have been most effective in rallying people, like bringing people together? And what advice would you give to those looking to make a difference in our communities?
I think authentic leadership is key. You've got to be transparent. You've got to be authentic. People have got to feel that it's real. I think secondly, you've got to give people examples of what the future looks like, i.e. let's club together and do this thing by ourselves, so that we show, hey, if this is what 10 people did, what could 100 people do?
Yeah.
So you've got to, people can't believe in a future they can't see. So you need to be able to demonstrate what that future looks like. I think that education is absolutely key. And I'm not talking about mainstream education. I'm talking about the kind of cultural education that you're going to need, and historical education you're going to need to make sense of a very complicated world in the future. And the way to do that is have cognizance of your journeys to the point thus far. And so looking at Black history, looking at the history of the development of our communities and countries in the global South and here, absolutely key to making sense of your life as a member of the African diaspora here in the United Kingdom. That education is absolutely key, hence why we need our own schools. These places are not going to educate the vast majority of these kids on the Angeltown estate in the way that we want. We've got to go in it. And okay, you might not be able to afford to do that. I'm a father of 9, 5 boys and 4 girls. I always say, I'm not leaving the school to educate my kids about Black values and shit. Hell no, you stick to maths and English. I'll teach them spirituality. I will teach them theology. I will teach them the value framework, because I want them to feel that, this is the tradition of our family
And our
and our
communities,
community. And they're not going to teach them that.
No.
And I don't know if you've ever seen any Black history being taught by white teachers who don't know Black history.
Well, I went to school here, and yeah.
Go, right? So if you're going to trust that, Karen from Norwich, right, to understand, Thomas and Cara and the role of Sojourner Truth, good luck with that. Yeah. I'm going to make sure that I communicate that history to my children. And so I take personal responsibility, not now, they're all grown, take personal responsibility in making sure that the history, the values, the theology and the spiritualism and the politics is not left for them to teach. It's my responsibility as a father to communicate those values to my kids, and also to live a life that is an exemplar of those values, so that they say, my dad would never have done that.
Yeah.
And they live by those values strong.
100%. And if you don't know, learn, and find spaces where you can learn together and be able to transform.
And there's nothing like learning. My whole life journey, and I'm still learning, and there's nothing so beautiful as a revelation and a learning opportunity.
Yes.
And the thing is you can learn from anybody. You
100%.
can even learn from your worst enemy. If you sit and listen for long enough, you can learn something. But you know what? One of the biggest crises, other than the climate crisis, which is an existential crisis facing, could mean the end of the world, but it's the empathy deficit. It's the inability of people to see life through somebody else's eyes, to walk that mile in somebody else's shoes. We've forgotten. We hear about people dying in small boats in the English Channel, and it's on TV for 5 minutes. And then a billionaire dies on a boat in Greece, and it's on the news for like 2 weeks. And even our community doesn't rock up and say, hold on a minute, these are Africans that are drowning in the sea. And why aren't we down at Dover demanding sea and air rescue or whatever it is? And so we've become inured even to our own suffering and pain, to an extent that our empathy, and I blame social media and commercialism and sexualized commercialism as a constant propaganda tool that wears down your empathy and says, as long as you're taking care of you and yours, you don't really need to borrow at anybody else. That's the biggest neoliberal lie that we've been sold.
Yeah. 100%. What role do you think intergenerational collaboration plays in community mobilization, especially when it comes to engaging the youth?
Vital. I think that, some of the lessons that we've been talking about here, we need to get these over to the young people. We need to give them the tools, the analytical tools that allow them to make sense to what is, even if you're educated today, the world is a very complicated place. And what's presented to you as reality, you've got to have the critical ability and analysis to be able to look past that and do the kind of research that allows you to come to a more objective determination. And having that critical faculty, being able to analyze, this is, a skill that is increasingly needed. And what we can do as elders is say, well, this is what we tried, this is what worked, this is what didn't work in our thing. Here is the data as it currently is. Now, here's what other people did in other countries to respond to those issues. Now, this is your time, new generation. Look at that information, have some discussions, come back and ask, call uncle and say, well, we didn't quite understand what happened. Yeah. And we give you, so we're like a grand advisory council, do you know what I mean, to the next generation, so that they can call on us and say, well, this is a tough one, how can you help? And we provide that. But people of mile have to step out the way in order that next generation can come through. I don't mean just back off and retire, but I mean is create the learning institutions, which is what I'm engaged in. Create the learning institutions that make sure that the leadership qualities and the leadership history of our communities is communicated and passed to this next generation of young people, and that they then know who to call when things get tough. And Black Sox has created a whole infrastructure of young Black people who've been through a training process called the Leadership Mentoring Training Program, which is a 12-week program, which deep dives into all of the issues I've just spoken about. And when they come out that other end, and not everybody does, because it forces you to challenge your own trauma, because, you know, part of the dysfunctionality of our leadership is that leaders with their own personal trauma, having not exercised that, export it into the movement. So you hear, how did he get into that position when he behaved so badly?
Yeah.
And what we don't understand is that everybody has trauma, and unless you've dealt with yours, you can't be stepping into that leadership position.
Yeah.
And some people with trauma are attracted to leadership positions like flies to a moth to a flame, because they think it will fill the hole of inside their own
they need
chest
validation in some
by
way.
external validation.
Yeah.
Can't work.
Yeah.
And so, you know, part of what we've got to do is create this legacy therapeutic training environment that, you know, gives this next generation the best chance of doing what we failed to do. And
I love that. Thank you so much. Lee, we've touched on some very heavy topics today.
I don't do light, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Well, this is all good. And I know, like, there's still so much more to cover. And would you be welcome, interested and open to coming back for another follow-up?
I'd love to. Yeah.
That's awesome. So we can go even further, deeper.
Absolutely.
We normally ask as well, do you have a message for Black British parents or our listeners, please?
Yeah, I think I do. I think, look, we're facing an existential crisis as a community. We've got climate change. You know, the UN says that 1 billion African, Caribbean and Asians are going to be climate refugees by 2050, right? And you know where they're headed? London, Paris, New York, and Rome, because they've got resources. And so we're going to have this mass global migration, right? Climate change may mean the collapse of the food economy in terms of agriculture and shifting weather patterns. These are monumental challenges for anybody to face. And Black communities here need to be first and foremost in advocating for climate justice and reparations for countries who are in the Caribbean, in Africa, in Latin America, whose ecosystems are completely messed up, who can't grow their own food production because of climate insecurity. That's only going to get worse. We need to unite about that. That's saving the planet. But we also have to save the people, because if the world continues to go in the way it is, with the extremities of the Trump and the Farages and other people in the world, then white supremacists will take us all to the brink of destruction, because that's the violent intent of the agenda. And so getting active here, getting active in the Caribbean, getting active in the continent, we have to have an awakening and a renaissance that brings education, brings empathy, history, and intelligence back to the fore, and stop trying to be YouTube influencers or some other.
Thank you so much, Lee. Guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Until next time, take care.